All right, it's the 26th of March. Welcome to Security Weekly News wrap-up for the week of 21 March. SolarWinds patches, Jack Dorsey's Clockblock, say that carefully, Tesla banned, 11 0 days in 1 year, Turing, and all the show wrap-ups on this edition of Security Weekly News.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. As technology continues to evolve and expand, so have the attackers that put our critical systems in jeopardy. Core Impact from Core Security is a penetration testing tool that safely finds vulnerabilities using the same techniques of adversaries, with certified exploits and wizards that guide you through critical pen tests while maximizing the time of advanced testers by automating their routines. With Core Security, you can safeguard your infrastructure by limiting access, detecting threats, testing for security weaknesses, and efficiently monitoring data. Visit securityweekly.com/core security. We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cyber Reason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cyber Reason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP.
All right, another week, another bunch of shows done. Let's see all the topics. On Application Security Weekly number 144, John and Mike had Johanna Irgod and Roberto Giachetti, the VP and Engineering Manager at Detectify, respectively. They were on to talk about how difficult it is to keep up on the security and assessment side with all the web apps that emerge by using the Detectify product. But I mean, it's definitely an interesting product, and it's trying to automate some of this vulnerability detection stuff that humans typically do well, but they don't tend to do fast enough with all the changes that are going on. So it's definitely something that I think we all need to start, sort of thinking about. If you're dealing with users who are changing things, apps that are being installed, and apps that are changing, patching, and all that kind of stuff. On Business Security Weekly number 210, Paul, Jason, and Adrian had Christopher Gates, the Director of Product Security at Valentium. And Christopher was on to talk about how you incorporate, and this was very interesting to me. How do you incorporate security into your medical device development process? I mean, think about that. And I've been aware of that. I had a friend who worked for a large company. I won't say the name of it, but they basically manufacture medical devices. And I remember years ago him asking me about, what do you think about this in terms of security? We're getting ready to put Bluetooth in this device. We're getting ready to, and you're like, wow, that's terrifying. But I think within a few years, a lot of people are going to be walking around with various bio devices that are embedded in you that are going to want to phone home. I mean, think about that. I mean, they already have them, right? I mean, I'm not even saying that this is something that's coming. It's something that's already here. Whether it's pacemakers that report, the current status back to the main office, so the doctor can review. I mean, you can literally get all this stuff right now. But I think even more of these things are starting to develop. So it's cool. But it's also kind of scary. In the second segment, 5 reasons why cybersecurity should be a priority while planning your business. 3 key tasks that help me work way less and accomplish more. Everything you need to know about dictionary attacks is misinformation slowing SASE adoption. And of course, they always have a lot more stories than I mentioned, but it's always a great show to watch. On Enterprise Security Weekly 220, Adrian, Paul, and Tyler Shields had on Trey Ford, the VP of Platform Strategy and Trust at Salesforce. Trey was on to talk about Heroku, which is a product that is balancing security of the application with security of deployment and platform. So that's a pretty complicated scenario as well. So as all these systems have so many different components going, and we talk about this all the time with patching, we talk about this all the time with risk, and all this stuff comes back home to be a problem, I think, for just about everybody. And they also had a bunch of tips and advice for deploying applications, which I was really interested in because I don't really support a production environment per se, but I kind of do. I mean, I have students who are using lab networks and things like that, as well as doing research onto this kind of stuff. And so one of the things I'm always thinking about is deployments. And it's a real challenge, I think, in a production environment. And when I used to do that, it was definitely always challenging back then. And then how do you keep all that secure? The second segment had Jarrett Roderick, the senior information security analyst at VMware, and he was on to talk about his new book with Tyler Wall, which is entitled Jumpstart Your SOC Analyst Career. So probably at least some of you are interested in reading this because you're trying to get into the security sector. I get asked a lot of questions about this kind of stuff all the time from various perspectives, from, how do I get into the security space to how do I move laterally within the security space? How do I move up within so definitely a book, segment you might want to check out. In the third segment, they had the news. On Security and Compliance Weekly number 66, Jeff, Josh, Liam, and Scott were talking with Dan DeCloss, our friend, and Sean Scott, the CEO. Dan is the CEO and founder, and he's got a whole pile of titles. And the VP of Success at PlexTrack. So Sean Scott is the Vice President of Success. I think this show happened because Jeff was talking to Dan DeCloss on Paul's Security Weekly last week. And he kept saying, "Why haven't you been on?" And then so all of a sudden, well, there he is. So they finally got him on, and Jeff got a chance to interrogate. Interview. That's the right word, right? How about interact? To interact with Dan and company some more in his own realm. The segment was about, could you ever guess? PCI, of course. And if you didn't see the Pulse Security Weekly conversation last week with Dan DeCloss, you probably should go watch that one, and then go watch this continuation of it on Security and Compliance Weekly. In the second segment, they continue to talk about how PlexTrack handles compliance. So just, basically a PCI compliance discussion with the PlexTrack people and how PlexTrack, which is a very interesting product, kind of works within that space. On Security Weekly News number 109, Basir Balazada, who's the Senior Technical Marketing Engineer, and Martin Crew is the Director of Industry Solutions at Gigamon, joined the show. And it was fun. Basir and I... Martin kind of introduced some of the Gigamon stuff, and then Basir and I talked about cloud security and cloud hybrid security and migrations to the cloud and some stuff like that. So it was a really nice. I mean, that's such a brief, chunk, but it was still fun to talk to Basir about that. He's a brilliant engineer, so lots of fun to talk with him. And I always like to talk to smart people because it makes me look better. On Paul's Security Weekly number 688 last night. In the swamp. So the air conditioning had failed last night in the studio. And I don't know if you've ever been in studios, but with all these lights and all these cameras and all this action, along with some giant Budweiser tall boys, and which made me feel like I was in high school, it was a sweaty evening. But in the first segment, Mehul Revankar, who's an old associate of, he's not old, but he's an old friend and associate of Paul from other ventures, but he is currently the VP of Product Management Engineering at Qualys, and he came on to talk about patching. And so that ended up being a pretty interesting discussion that was sort of all over the place about patching and vulnerabilities and some things like that, as well as he did a demo. But he talked about patching delays and why you have to have a plan, and we all got to ask a bunch of questions about all that stuff. So it was a pretty good segment to watch. In the second segment, if you missed the second segment, it's always a treat. Sven Morgenroth, who comes on every now and then, he's a security researcher at NetSparker. And anytime I see that Sven's going to be on, I always try to be on the show because this is somebody who always is just like, Uber hacker person, was on talking about open redirects and not just talking about them, but showing how they work, how to do them, and then providing a demonstration of that being done. So if you've ever been interested in that kind of attack vector, Sven is always, really, really fun to have on and for that. So I always enjoy him being there. In the third segment, of course, the sweaty security news. So by the time I left, I was, I think they had to squeegee out the chairs later. But it actually wasn't that hot. But I was glad I chose to wear shorts last night because it was warmer and I knew it would get hot. So since we have these nice tables, you can't actually see if I'm wearing shorts or pants or thongs or whatever. My favorite thread of the week is going to be politics. And I always try to avoid talking about politics on this show and on all other shows because political ideology is not really relevant. I've heard people say, college professors are indoctrinating people, but I don't teach politics and I don't teach philosophy and I don't teach ethics or any of that kind of stuff. I teach technology, so I don't talk about that stuff in my classes, and I try not to talk about it here. And I'm not going to talk about that today. If you want to believe the earth is flat, well, you're an idiot. But okay, it's still not relevant. But when politics gets involved in security, it starts to distort security, kind of like it does to everything else. I mean, why do you want to use logic and reason when you could just use political ideology as a basis for everything? And that just drives me crazy. If I disagree with you about politics, that's fine, and we can disagree, but I don't like it when there's no logic involved. So if you say cutting interest rates is a good idea and I say cutting interest rates is a bad idea, okay, we don't agree on the economic, model. But I just don't like it when people just say crazy stuff and it's based on a bunch of nonsense. And politics, lately seems like people just pick a color and they start cheering for their team, and it doesn't really matter if it makes any sense or if they even understand what they're cheering for. On all sides, so I'm not picking a side here. But back to the point anyway. So the story that I got this from was about TikTok. And basically what has been found now upon review is that TikTok, which is owned by ByteDance, a Chinese company that is operating in the United States, and they also operate Douyin in China, and it's essentially the same product. It's just one is in China and it is for the Chinese market, and one is in the rest of the world, the English-speaking world. But it turns out that TikTok apparently did not really do any of the dire things that were being said about them last year. Now, if you don't recall that, we did several stories about it, but former President Donald Trump decided that he was going to use TikTok as a target, as a basis for his trade war with China. And so instead of, analyzing TikTok and deciding that it was a true threat, it was just a bunch of hyperbole. And I think that's dangerous. TikTok was accused of everything from censorship to privacy violation to cattle mutilation to, you name it. It was being said that TikTok was the most dangerous product in the world, and none of it appears to have had any basis in any sort of actual fact. Citizen Lab, who did this analysis of TikTok, said that TikTok does include some unusual internal designs, but does not otherwise exhibit overtly malicious behavior. They did go on and say that Douyin Douyin has a dynamic code loading feature that could be viewed as malicious, but that it is a very common practice in the Chinese market, and that feature was not actually in the TikTok app. I mean, they deconstructed it, reverse engineered. I don't know what they did, but they reviewed the source code. So, and they talk about that a lot in this article that I attached. So probably all the hoopla about it last year was not about security, but it was just about political maneuvers, which I find frustrating. I mean, imagine that, though, right? I mean, but wouldn't it be better if instead of getting everybody all worked up and banning stuff and blocking things and telling people that there's all these threats, that we'd actually taken the time to analyze the app instead of just trying to ban it with a lot of bloviating about it? Really? I mean, it really drives me crazy. Now, granted, It's a Chinese-based company. And as much as I like China and the Chinese people, their government's pretty much a total dictatorship that represses human rights and is really, really awful. So, I mean, I will say that. So I'm not just saying that we ought to ignore the threat from China or the threat from the potential threat from Chinese products. In fact, I'm saying just the opposite. I want us to examine the threat and see if it's actually real. And if so, what should we do about it? Not just jump on the red or the blue bandwagon and start slashing and burning for my team because, hey, somebody said so. Because then you get that boy who cried wolf problem going. And pretty soon nobody will listen to you about security because you're going to, if people just start picking things at random. There's another story later today. We could talk about that again. Note to self, I was never any good at anything involved in a team, so I might be biased, and I'm probably not going to join one of the teams this time either. But look at Chris Krebs. I mean, Chris Krebs got fired. I mean, this was also last year. So Chris was hired to run CISA when it was created, and it seemed like he was doing a really great job. He has some political viewpoints I don't agree with, probably some you don't agree with, and so forth. But so what? He was doing a great job at CISA. The politics that he held didn't really affect it. I mean, I thought he pretty much improved the whole organization. They did some good things and then fired. Why was he fired? Because he wouldn't jump on board of some political nonsense and say some things that weren't true. So instead of just leaving politics to politicians, the politicians fired a tech because he wouldn't say what they wanted. And I just think that's a generally bad idea. I mean, I really get frustrated with all that kind of stuff. I don't trust the Chinese government. I don't trust the U.S. government very much either. I don't really trust anyone. But I think we should focus on the examination of the security and apps and what they do, and then let people know so they can evaluate the risk, not just jump on some rubber stamping bandwagon and say this is bad and this is good. You've seen this with censorship and all these other kind of things as well. I always remember Frank Zappa testifying to Congress and how very astute he was and how smart he was. And, this was this clown circus at Congress where they're trying to, it was Al Gore's wife trying to censor albums and all this stuff. It was just really ridiculous. And Frank Zappa and Dee Schneider, who you probably wouldn't think either one of them would be like the best representative, but they were awesome. They were so well spoken, and they really made it look ridiculous. But, anyway. But I don't like this kind of stuff. And it gets on my nerves, as you can probably tell, because I've gone on and on about it. But, let's analyze it. Let's report it. Let's find the truth and leave the politics to somebody sitting on C-SPAN. And also, let's be careful about that team stuff because it's really starting to get on my nerves. All right. Enough. SolarWinds has released a security update that addresses 4 vulnerabilities which were found in the Orion IT monitoring product. So this is beyond all these other problems. So 2 of those vulnerabilities did allow remote code execution. Again, now there are some conditions around that. The worst one, so the most severe one that was there, was a JSON deserialization attack that allowed the remote code execution. And if you don't know what a JSON serialization, deserialization process is, it's basically a mechanism that allows you to take something like a .NET object and convert it into JSON strings so they can be shipped over HTTP. And then they get the deserialization converts them back into .NET objects. So this was an attack around that. And basically that means you could send things maybe that shouldn't be sent, like, say, code. That one, even though it was severe, did require that you be authenticated to use the exploit. The second one, there's 4 of them, but there were 2 that were severe. The second one had remote code execution as well, and it was a problem in the Orion job scheduler that could allow execution as administrator. It did require that you have an unprivileged local account credentials. Wow, how hard is that? But, so patch. I did want to mention Jeff's story from last night about Alan Turing. Turing is one of my personal heroes. He and the GSHQ, which is the British version of NSA, created their most difficult puzzle ever in honor of Alan Turing. And Jeff was talking about that last night on the show, and I got a little carried away talking about Michi and Babbage and all that kind of stuff. But, it was Pulse Security Weekly. Anyway, Turing was one of the founders of computer science. He's an all-around brilliant fellow. His papers will stretch your mind, and even if you go back into the 1930s, I assure you will be impressed with what he was working on. Unfortunately for everyone, the British government did not allow anyone to be non-cisgendered or did not anyone to be non-cisgendered or non-straight, regardless of how many other non-straight people were running around. And Dr. Turing was caught, tried, and convicted of perversion, if you can imagine. So despite his massive efforts in World War II and his amazing contribution to the British government and the world at large, they stripped him of all of his security credentials. They forced him to undergo chemical castration in order not to go to prison, and he subsequently committed suicide. So read the story, do the puzzle if you want to, or better yet, go read some of Alan Turing's work. CISA released a tool that allows for detection of malicious activity associated with a SolarWinds attack. The tool is called Chirp, which stands for CISA Hunt and Incident Response Program, and it's a Python-based tool. This tool states that it's associated with 2 alerts that are both specifically associated with a SolarWinds attack. And that's the second tool that CISA has released this year. The other one was associated with Microsoft. That's the second tool associated with Microsoft. The other tool was called Sparrow and was a PowerShell-based tool and focused on threats to Azure and Microsoft 365 environments. The Chirp tool scans for malware called Teardrop and Raindrop, looks for credential dumping cert pulls, and looks for persistent components of the SolarWinds attack, and so on, in order to help you try to find out if you are vulnerable, have been compromised, and so forth. So it's good to see CISA putting some tools out there, and they're free, so check them out. Google Project Zero researchers have provided and keep commenting on an APT that used at least 11 zero days in less than a year in spying efforts. The attacks themselves are not really that interesting, as they're just basically your garden variety watering hole attacks. And if you haven't heard us talk about watering hole attacks, basically it means I compromise a server and then I embed malware there, and I hopefully am targeting a server that your company people may well use so I can get to them. So it's a kind of phishing, but I actually decided I was going to call it alligatoring or crocodiling, gatoring. I'm going to call it gatoring. So, because, alligators sit in the water with just their eyes sticking up, and then when you go to get a drink, they grab you. Yeah, I think I like that. So I'm going to call it gatoring. If nobody likes it, too bad. So anyway, you find a site, you get people that that people from company X always go to, and then you hopefully can get them with the malware. And the hard part, of course, being that you have to take over the server and put the malware on it. So basically, according to Project Zero's Maddie Stone, they used a lot of 0 days last year in order to accomplish all this. And I mean, 11, that's a lot. And they think there may be more than that, but that's a lot of 0 days. And so last night on Paul's Security Weekly, we talked about this quite a bit. And, and I was at least saying that, so what? They may have bought these 0 days, or maybe they did find them, or maybe they were even turned over to them by somebody else, some other division of a government, possibly. It's just not clear what the attack had as an objective. And it's possible that it's a smokescreen for something else or not. I mean, if James Bond got sent in to get a copy of a KGB file on some missile, there's a lot of resources that would be expended beyond just sending in James Bond in a warehouse. I mean, just the amount of penicillin that Bond must have had to, be provided with is amazing. China has banned Tesla vehicles from entering military bases and military housing units. The order was not about self-driving cars or safety, but it was about the number of cameras that are available on Teslas. So pretty much like every world government, China's a little bit touchy about people taking pictures of their stuff. And I mean, I got in a jam once because I just took some pictures of the Changjiang River, and there was a government unit out there doing something, and they saw me taking pictures and got all worked up. Fortunately, I had a very wealthy and powerful friend who had provided us with a car and a driver, and once they saw who the car belonged to, they kind of backed off. But nevertheless, so I guess that Tesla and all the cameras on the vehicle are kind of a problem on a military base. A Tesla may have dashboard cams that can be activated remotely or by different activities, and where does all that video go? California, Texas, Elon, Mars, wherever Elon is living these days, and I guess he probably reviews it all. Wouldn't surprise me to see other vehicles in the same situation, though. A lot of modern vehicles are coming out with cameras, and if it's not just politics, which it could be, there's been several articles about Elon, talking about how great China is, and China talking about how great he is, but, all it takes is one tweet, right? But all this stuff, they have issues with smartphones and everything else too, and drones and you name it. I have a great interest in ICS and SCADA type systems, and this new report that I put on here shows that 70% of manufacturing apps had vulnerabilities in this test, and that 70% represented at least one serious vulnerability that was open over the last year, according to the report. I mean, that's just what was found. A lot of ICS type systems use that Purdue model, and that meant that the OT network, which is the manufacturing components, was isolated from everything else traditionally, and it advocates a very zero trusty kind of design. The IT side, which is the regular corporate network, not so much. But the problem is not the Purdue model; it's the attitude that OT space is inaccessible or hidden. And according to a lot of people I've met with, that's the way they feel about it. It's like, well, nobody can get to it, and it's weird and obscure, and it's security to obscurity and all that kind of stuff. If it really is inaccessible, okay, but that's changed, right? The addition of a lot of IIoT components into that OT space means that some of these devices require connections. They may have Wi-Fi for employees, iPads wandering around in there, on and on and on. And all of that means that increasingly those dusty, oily, hidden facilities full of machinery are filled with connections. And that old security to obscurity thing from the Purdue model is wearing a little bit thin with me. Add to this fact that nation states and other APTs have massive interest in infrastructure attacks, supply chain attacks, and just plain old unpatched equipment. And all that stuff sometimes has hard-coded default passwords and all sorts of things because it was never designed to be exposed to the interwebs. And finally, well, Congress is querying the big social media billionaires again because that always solves everything, right? The House Energy and Commerce Committee this time summoned, and I heard that Zuck appeared in a puff of smoke when he was summoned, but I don't know. I'm not sure if that really happened. But anyway, they summoned Zuck, Jack, and Sundar to the hearing, and we've seen this before, to ask them why they can't contain misinformation. Now, take note. Quite a few of the members who were doing the summoning have put out a hell of a lot of misinformation about the election, about everything and anything over the last couple of years. I mean, go look at who was on that commission. Right. You got a lot of nerve asking them why they can't control misinformation when it's every other word out of your mouth is something like that. But anyway, let's blame Twitter. Why not? Anyway, the silly, pointless hearings aside, that was not the point of my story. The real talk of the day, because the hearing was kind of pointless, was about Dorsey's clock. So, understand these guys are billionaires, right? So if one of them had a clock made of human bones in the background, I mean, would anybody really go, oh, wow, he has a clock made of human bones? Like, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. They're billionaires. Of course they have cool stuff. Anyway, Dorsey has this clock in the background of his screen because they weren't actually in person, right? And it looked very weird to everyone because it had these strange numbers on it, and everybody started talking about it on Twitter, and it's called a BlockClock, which almost sounds like something else, and I was really hoping I could say BlockClock and not clock. No, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say that on a family show. But anyway, it's not a clock, and it's not a Clockblock. It's a BlockClock. See, I did that. It's made by CoinKite, and it's basically used to display the current price of Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. So Dorsey, who is famous for being a cryptocurrency enthusiast, of course has such a thing in his background. The BlockClock costs $400 and then you can tell it what you want it to display. So it's just displaying, something about that. Now, if you want a martini recipe that requires a squeezing of endangered species to generate the juice, well, see me after the show and we can talk. Anyway, that's the news wrap-up for the week of 21 March 2021 in a time of plague. Please get your shots and stop listening to nonsense, all right? And I want a shot.